Have y'all ever thought about starting your own podcast but thought it would be too complicated? If your answer to that question is yes, let me tell you about Anchor. Anchor is the easiest way to start a quality podcast. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from any device. And on top of that, Anchor is owned by Spotify, so you have access to a full library of sound effects, background music, transitions, and even full songs that you can add in. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, and it will hook you up with sponsors so you can make money on your podcast. It's literally everything you could ever need to start a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started.
What is up, everyone? It's the Raw Prospect Podcast, episode 67. We are back with another episode. And joining me, as always, from the same city for once, actually, Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Michael Ween. What is up, man?
What is up? Welcome back to the ATX. So I'm going to let you have the first, 3 or 4 minutes to kind of explain your situation and what's going to be coming in the next week to a month, and then we'll get into today's episode.
Right. So what he's alluding to is the fact that you probably noticed, as if you're watching on the YouTube version of this, how empty my room is and how blank it is, because I'm actually moving. The moving company is actually coming tomorrow morning. We're moving, and our next house isn't actually going to be ready for another month. So we're actually going to be staying at my grandmother's house and also staying with friends in Dallas and kind of switching around. So in the next few weeks, you might see a couple of solo episodes from Michael, maybe a solo episode from me. It might be us getting together, but it might be a little bit dicey with the content in the next few weeks. So just wanted to give all of our subscribers a heads up. But with all that being said, we can get right into it. Today we're going to talk NBA. A lot has happened, and obviously the playoffs are coming up, and the standings are really tight. Obviously, we still have our Eastern Conference preview to do, but a lot has happened in the West since we last did our Western Conference episode. So we're just going to start off with the East here, and then we'll revisit the West briefly, and then we're just going to talk about what teams we like and what teams we don't as we go, just contender, pretender, that kind of thing as we go down here. And, that will be the episode.
So let's get into the East first, because we haven't talked about the East in a long time. We did the West back a couple episodes before the NFL draft happened. And by the way, later this week, hopefully, we're hoping to get a bonus episode out. That will be an NFL draft recap and an Aaron Rodgers discussion. If you guys haven't heard what's going on in Green Bay, we're hoping to have that out on our Patreon, which Emmy just started, a couple weeks ago. So we'll keep you updated on that. But from an Eastern Conference perspective, let's start at the top. And let's talk about the Philadelphia 76ers,
right,
who are currently the number one overall seed. And I believe they have a chance. I don't have the scenarios in front of me, but I believe they have a chance to clinch that here with maybe one or two more wins, I believe, because they hold the tiebreakers over the other teams that are right on their tail, the Nets and the Bucks, I believe. So I want to get your thoughts on the 76ers, and then maybe talk about who they might face in that first round.
Right. So the outlook on the Sixers really, it all starts with Joel Embiid. This year, he's been incredible, MVP level numbers. Obviously, he had that stretch where he missed games, and they were able to weather the storm a little bit. But this team, their calling card is on defense. And really, the biggest change with this team was the fact that they committed defensively and they added some shooting in the offseason. And then obviously it helps a lot that Joel Embiid is playing how we know he can play consistently as that at that MVP level. So with Joel Embiid in the middle, I mean, they have the mismatch for any of these teams in the East. It's just whether they can execute down the stretch in these close games, especially given the Ben Simmons factor with him not having a jump shot and all that. So that'll be interesting to see once again in these playoffs how that'll affect them. But overall, I feel pretty good about this team. If the playoffs were to start today, they would be playing the Hornets, right? So they would be playing either the Hornets or the Celtics, depending on. Well, actually, they would be playing. They could play anybody from that play-in scenario bracket. But if it started today, it would be the Hornets. And really, I think they should be worried more about the second round. I think the second round, if they end up playing the Hawks or the Knicks, I think that's probably what they want. But if the Heat sneak into that 5 seed, that's where it gets a little bit more dicey because I think the Heat match up with them a lot better with Bam Adebayo, to match up with Joel. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about them.
Well, yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. As far as lately, the Sixers have been one of the hottest, if not the hottest team in the NBA. They've won 8 straight games. And you mentioned the defense. That is definitely the calling card of this team. They rank second on the season in defensive rating, 106.8 points per 100 possessions allowed. And in this stretch of 8 games, which they've won all 8, they're holding opponents to just 101 points per 100 possessions over that streak. So they've been really, really good, if not elite defensively. And they're playing well. For me, it's going to be interesting to see how Doc Rivers, their head coach, staggers the minutes of his starters come playoff time. During the regular season, he's given the starters, on average, about 21 minutes per game that the group has averaged. And that's by far the most for a lineup that's played at least 10 games together. And that's 9 more minutes than the starters for the Sixers averaged last season with Brett Brown. So it's going to be interesting how he staggers those minutes for those starters. They have been getting more bench production, I believe, lately. So that's a good sign. That's something that's really ailed this team in the past. But I mentioned the starters. The reason I want to mention that is because when Philadelphia has had its full starting lineup healthy, they're 26-4 in 30 games, and they're 15-0 at home. The only game they lost when all their starters were healthy to an Eastern Conference opponent. The only game they lost to an Eastern Conference opponent, in the 15 minutes the starters were on the floor, they outscored that opponent by 21 points. And in the other however many minutes the starters were off the floor, they got outscored by 28 points. So I think the X factors, it obviously comes down to Joel Embiid. He's the centerpiece. The defense, and then the bench. The bench scoring is going to be something that I'm really watching for because once Joel Embiid goes off the floor, where does that offense come from? So I really like the Sixers. I think they're playing really well at the right time. I think they can definitely get to the Eastern Conference Finals, playing like they are, if not the finals. But we'll just have to see who they match up with come the second round, and then, like you mentioned, maybe come Eastern Conference Finals.
Right. It's going to be a lot to do with matchups for sure. And with the bench unit, I think Doc has been running Tobias Harris with the second unit, like having the starters come off the floor late in the first quarter, but he stay on to run that second unit scoring a little bit, and that's been helping them a lot. So I think they need to continue that in the playoffs and definitely keep one of their main three guys on the floor at all times. That's going to be a big key.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, moving on to the Brooklyn Nets here. This team has wobbled their way to the second seed. They haven't had all three of their guys all year, it feels like. I mean, obviously, they made the trade for James Harden, like, close to the beginning of the season, but then injuries between the three of them all at different times, it feels like. So it's wild just how good this team has been despite not being at full strength like at all. So once they get James Harden back, I expect for them to be a lot better. We saw them lose to the Bucks a few weeks ago, and a lot of people I saw were overreacting about that game, and they thinking like maybe the Bucks can beat the Nets, and I think it could happen. But with James Harden coming back, that's a big deal. Like I think people are underrating the fact that they have a top 10 player just sitting in a suit right now, not playing. So once they get James Harden back, I think this team is the favorite to make the finals. They're actually getting stops now. They have, I think they have an okay big rotation. I think Blake Griffin has been giving them good minutes. Nick Claxton, I think he needs to get more minutes because he gives them some switchability. The biggest thing for them is going to be defending big men in deep in the postseason, like Joel Embiid and Giannis. Those are really the only two. Maybe Bam Adebayo a little bit, but I don't worry as much about the Heat. But I'm interested to hear what you have to say. They're an interesting team.
Yeah, there's sort of a little bit of pressure here on Brooklyn coming down the stretch this last week of the regular season. Milwaukee is only a half game back in the loss column, and they do own the tiebreaker over Brooklyn by virtue of their two victories, a couple weeks ago. So over the Nets. Now, you mentioned James Harden. I agree. If all three of these guys are healthy, and I don't really care how bad the statistics say they are on the defensive end of the floor, if all three of their guys are fully healthy, they are lethal, and they're going to be really hard to beat 4 out of 7 times in a series, just because of the firepower they have offensively and the supporting cast they have around these guys. We're talking about guys like Joe Harris, guys off the bench. They have scoring everywhere. When all three guys play, Kyrie, James Harden, Kevin Durant, the Nets have an offensive rating of 126.4, and they're outscoring opponents by 13 points per 100 possessions. Now, they obviously do need to get James Harden back in the fold. I do not think they can win a championship without him, because without him, they're 9-11. So they're sort of struggling here. And you mentioned, they just had a 4-game losing streak. They did mount an impressive comeback against the Denver Nuggets a couple nights ago. They were down 20 plus and they came back. So that kind of just shows you the firepower they do have. But I think as long as really what it boils down to is these guys being healthy and then staying healthy for the month and a half that is the NBA playoffs. I really don't. If these guys are creating their own shots, other guys around them are just playing their roles, I really don't see a way, unless they're just historically terrible on defense, that they're going to be beat 4 times. And remember, you got to beat these guys 4 times in a span of, a week and a half over the span of a series. That's going to be really tough to do. So, yes, they should be the favorites as long as they get James Harden back in the fold. And I believe there was a report today that he should be returning Tuesday or Wednesday. So that's good news for Brooklyn.
Right. So with that, what do you think about these possible matchups? If the playoffs were to start today, they would be playing the Boston Celtics, and I feel like that's a pretty realistic matchup. I mean, I think the Celtics would win a play-in scenario against the Hornets, but anything can happen. But I think they can. I think they'll sweep the Celtics. They haven't been good this year, and then they just lost Jaylen Brown for the rest of the season. Um, and then second round, it would most likely be Milwaukee, or if Milwaukee loses in the first round, it would be Atlanta or Miami, since those two teams are actually have the same record right now. So we still don't know who's going to be 5 and who's 6. But I think the Nets, depending on how things stack up, they might have a pretty easy road to the conference finals if Milwaukee somehow gets upset. But if Milwaukee ends up in that second round, I think that's going to be a really good series. Probably six games, I think.
Yeah, 2-3 matchup between the Bucks and the Nets. That'd be must-watch TV.
Right.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, I don't think the Hornets are challenging anybody, at least in a 7-game series. As you mentioned, the Celtics, big blow today, losing Jaylen Brown, unfortunately for him. That stinks. I was hoping maybe the Celtics would kind of make a late season push, but it really hasn't happened. And then the Heat is really the team that I really worry about here. And we'll talk about them more in depth here in a little bit. But that's really a team I would watch out for here, kind of at the bottom of the East, just because of their experience, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, all of that. But I don't really see the Celtics or the Hornets posing, or even the Wizards if they were to somehow win the play-in and get there. I mean, they breeze to the first round, the second round, depending on where they are. And I think it's important that we watch over these next couple games, because if the Nets fall to the 3, that could change some things, because they wouldn't get home court for that second round series against the Bucks. And I think home court could maybe play a factor in that. So I don't know. We'll see. But let's talk about Milwaukee.
Right.
While we're at it.
Yeah. So Milwaukee, as you said, half game back of the Nets right now, and they have the tiebreaker. So and they actually, only reason they're half game back is because they played less games. So if they win out, the destiny's in their own hands. They have the same amount of losses as Brooklyn does right now. So Milwaukee's in good shape, and Giannis, I really like what I've been seeing from him. I have always been someone who has said that I think a little post fadeaway or like a hook shot would be way more important for Giannis than a 3-point shot. And obviously, I mean, he's working on his 3-point shot. That's great, because teams are going to give him that shot. But in the playoffs, he just needs like a go-to move that he can hit like 60% of the time, 50% of the time. That's not just like a dunk, because that dunk is not going to be given to him in the playoffs. He's got to have that fadeaway, that hook shot or something like that, to where he can go to it and get that bucket when they need it. And he's been showing that move a little bit, and that's a really good sign. Whether it's where it needs to be for the playoffs, we'll see. But the fact that he's showing that he can make that shot is really, really encouraging. And if he can make that shot in the playoffs, I have a really good feeling about this Bucks team. I think they're being overlooked a little bit.
I do too. Giannis is basically replicating the same statistical output that he has the past 2 years when he's won the MVP back to back. So that's a good sign. In addition to Giannis, both Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton are putting up fantastic numbers in a supporting role, sort of. Chris Middleton, obviously all-star caliber player, same with Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday's brought kind of a different dimension to this team from a shot creation perspective and a defensive perspective from the point guard position. I think they're both averaging like 23 points per game over the last 10 or however many games. I don't know the exact stat, but they're getting really elite production from all three of those guys. The really stark difference that I see in this Milwaukee team, and you can tell me if it's, I guess, relevant or is going to matter at all, but the Bucks the past couple of years have always been a high volume 3-point shooting team, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the statistics going 2 years back, but last year they were fourth in 3-point attempts per game. They shot a lot of them, 38.7. But they only were shooting about 35.5%. That ranked below average in the league last year at 17th. This season, they're still shooting a ton of threes, but they're also making more threes. They ranked 8th in 3-point attempts per game. It's gone down a little bit from last year to 37 attempts, not by much, but they're second in the league in 3-point shooting percentage, making almost 40% of those shots. So if that continues, that's a pretty. I mean, it's not going to be an end all be all, but it's a stark contrast here in terms of the amount of 3-point shots and the accuracy with which they're shooting them with. So I don't know how much that is going to matter, but that's just something that could, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think last couple of years they definitely have gone cold in the playoffs from three. That's a real thing. But I think with the addition of guys like Bobby Portis and with Dante DiVincenzo improving from three, and some of these guys off the bench, Pat Connaughton, obviously they still have Brook Lopez. I think this team is more equipped for mass shooting that they want to do. They obviously wanted to do that last year because it fits Giannis's game, spread out the 3-point line and have Giannis drive. But this year they're more equipped to do it. And also, I think this year the players around Giannis aren't just spot-up shooters. They actually have some creation skills as well as spot-up shooting skills, which helps a lot as well so that they're not so reliant on Giannis to create everything for the team. Bobby Portis can create his own shot. Dante DiVincenzo is improving, creating his own shot. We've seen big games from Brook Lopez in the playoffs. Obviously, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday. They have a lot more players that can go get a bucket when they need it.
Yep. That's what I like about the Milwaukee team. Now, in terms of first-round matchups, well, the remaining schedule isn't anything too challenging, so they should be able to, I think you mentioned it, they should be able to possibly get up to the number 2 seed because they do own the tiebreaker. They have San Antonio, Orlando, Indiana, Miami, and Chicago this last week. So we'll see how they fare over that stretch. But right now, if the playoffs were to start today, they would play the Heat in a 3-6 matchup. So what do you think about that potential?
Well, right off the bat, I think you got to put Drew Holiday on Jimmy Butler. I think that's a given. And the biggest thing is going to be defending the 3-point line because last year they got scorched from the 3-point line against the Heat. They love defending the paint, but against the Heat, you can't help off shooters. You got to make them drive, especially the Tyler Heroes of the world, Duncan Robinsons of the world. You got to make them drive and run them out the 3-point line. That's the most important thing. So hopefully if they change their game plan a little bit, they should be able to win that series. But if they stay the same and they stay stubborn, then Miami will creep up on them and beat them.
Yeah, Miami is a threat here. But I do think Milwaukee would find a way to win that series. I just really like the way they're playing right now. I really like Giannis. So I don't know. We can get more in depth when we talk about Miami. I have some things I want to mention with them, but let's I'm trying to keep this swift and moving at a decent pace. Let's talk about the New York Knicks. The maybe biggest surprise, definitely actually the biggest surprise of the NBA season, in my opinion. 38-30, sitting 4 overall. Just beat the Clippers yesterday. An impressive performance they got from Derrick Rose. On the road, it was their 5th game on a Western Conference road trip. A lot of people question whether they'd be tired and blah, 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 but they pulled it out. So let's talk about the Knicks. As far as the Knicks go, and I'll start with this one, the backbone of this team has really been, and it all stems back to Tom Thibodeau, I think, as a coach. He's really changed the culture and the identity of the New York Knicks as a basketball team. They play hard every single night, and they're really good on defense. They rank 4th in defensive rating, 108.1, and they're also really good at defending the paint. They're 4th in opponent points coming in the paint. So they're really good on defense. They play hard every night, and they have guys who can create offense. I think that Derrick Rose trade, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but the acquisition of Derrick Rose has really helped them. It's really been an impactful addition, possibly one of the most impactful additions of the entire trade deadline or trade season. And I think he's kind of the X factor here going into the playoffs. I really like his closing ability. He's been really good down the stretch of games, and it showed yesterday. I did watch the second half of the Clippers and the Knicks game, and he was the guy initiating the offense, coming down the stretch, getting big buckets, doing Derrick Rose MVP type things that he used to do. His playoff experience, he has, I believe, the most playoff experience on the roster by a lot. So obviously, so that could play a big factor. And then just his shot creation from the perimeter. I mean, he put up 25 points last night. I believe he's averaging like 18 or 19 points per game since coming over and arriving in New York. So he's been a big addition here. I think he's really kind of the X factor. We know about RJ Barrett. We know that Julius Randle is going to be an all NBA selection, probably 2nd or 3rd team. Some would say he's an MVP candidate. We can have that discussion another day. But yeah, I mean, the Knicks, a 1st round matchup with the Hawks, possibly the Heat. Let's see. The Heat they're actually tied, I believe, for the 5 and the 6. So I think the Knicks win a couple more games coming down the stretch. They lock up that home court advantage, which I do think will be key. And I think they're capable of winning a 1st round series. Obviously, depends on who they play, but I want to get your thoughts.
Well, the first thing I want to do is give credit to Tom Thibodeau. I mean, and also give credit to the Knicks GM. I actually can't think of his name, but it's the guy with the buzz cut. But anyway,
I'll look up his name real fast.
Right? Yeah. While you're doing that, I'm sorry, I got something stuck caught in my throat. But anyway, I got what's his name?
Scott Perry.
Okay, Scott Perry. Right. You got to give credit to him. I mean, he's done a really good job. Obviously, the roster is not like amazing, but just having the discipline to build through the draft and not give up a ton of picks and ruin the rebuild. I think that's the biggest thing. And then also, I got to give credit to RJ Barrett as well. I mean, clearly he has put in the work. He's improved his free throw shooting, his 3-point shooting. and just obviously the spacing for the team has improved. So he's been able to drive to the basket a lot more, and I think he has the chance of becoming a all-star player. He comes under the radar for a guy who plays in New York, but he's as good as any from that 2019 class. I think he's the X factor on that team. I think Rose, I think his points, he's going to give you what he's going to give you. I think he's going to give you 17 to 25 each and every night. But having that having that third guy, obviously behind Rose and Julius Randle, is going to be really important if they're going to beat a team like the Hawks or the Heat, who have more firepower than them offensively.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The Knicks they're a fun team to watch, and the identity, as you mentioned, a lot of the credit goes to Tom Thibodeau, who's just come in and he's totally overdone or reiterated, or I don't know the word for it, but he's changed the entire identity of this team. The backbone is the defense. We'll just have to see who they match up with in the first round. Now let's talk about, I kind of want to, just for time's sakes, I don't want to run too long today.
Right.
Let's talk about sort of the bottom of the East. So I'm talking about as it stands right now. Let's just sort of have a conversation about the Heat, the Celtics, and the Hawks. We can include them in this too. We can, I guess, also include the Hornets if you want. Out of those teams, given what we know, who's the biggest threat to get to, I don't know, the Eastern Conference Finals, or to get who do you see going the furthest, or who's the biggest threat out of those teams?
Well, actually, I think it's the Miami Heat. And then if I'm picking a second team, it would be the Washington Wizards, actually.
Oh, wow.
Wow. I'm not like super high on the Wizards, but given the fact that they have two All-Stars, I have to give them a shot. Obviously their matchup is not going to be great, given the fact that the highest they can go is 7. But they have 2 superstar players, so they're going to have a shot, and they've been one of the hottest teams in the league over the past 2 months. And then obviously the Heat, they were in the finals last year. I think that speaks for itself. Jimmy Butler, he can will this team if he's healthy. He has been in and out of the lineup the whole year. And then also, everybody's forgetting they added Victor Oladipo. So if he can get healthy, he's going to add another bit of scoring punch and perimeter defense as well. So if they can get healthy and get in gear a little bit, that team is dangerous.
I think I might agree with you, and the reason is because we just got the news today that the Celtics are going to be without Jaylen Brown the rest of the season. We know they do have talent, but I think it's going to be really hard without that second All-Star next to Jason Tatum to go super far. Kemba Walker's been inconsistent. The Hawks, maybe. Bogdanovic has been hot lately. He's actually been sort of ridiculous. He's made 90 of his past 183 three-pointers, shooting 49.2% from 3 over the last 20 games. And that's contributed to a lot of success offensively for the Hawks in their 5 games in the month of May so far. They're scoring almost 126 points per 100 possessions, being efficient on offense. Obviously, they're getting DeAndre Hunter back tonight. I just saw that. That's big for the defensive end of the floor. And also from a three-point shooting perspective, floor spacing perspective. So maybe, they could steal a series from the Knicks if they were to match up with the Knicks, but I don't really see them being a threat to go any further than that. But I really do think the Heat and the Wizards are 2 pretty dangerous teams here coming down the stretch. I'd have to agree with you there. For the Heat, they're 8th in defensive rating. Again, really solid on defense under Eric Spoelstra. This would be the 18th time in the last 25 years they finished top 10 in defensive rating. Now, given that they are super good on defense, they do allow their opponents to take a really great percentage of their shots from three. 46% of their opponent's shots come from three, and they're 4-16 when their opponents have shot better than 40% from beyond the arc. So they're going to have to do a little bit better job defending the three-point line, but they force a lot of turnovers and they protect the rim, and they do it without fouling. So I think that's a big thing. Jimmy Butler obviously is huge from an offensive and defensive perspective. So I really like what the Heat are doing. They've won 9 of their last 12. They're scoring 118.7 points per 100 possessions. That's the league's third best mark over that stretch. So they're playing good on offense. They're playing good on defense. They just need to make sure they're getting consistent energy on the defensive end of the floor each and every night and defending the three-point line, because there are some lethal teams out there in the East that can kill you from three if you don't watch out. I'm just going to go ahead and address the Wizards as well. Look, Russell Westbrook has been insane lately. Over the past 4.5 weeks, a month, they have the 4th ranked offense over that stretch. They've seen huge offensive improvement in Russell Westbrook, especially when he's on the floor. With Bradley Beal and without Bradley Beal, through April 5th, I'm getting all these stats from NBA.com, by the way. Should mention that, give credit to my sources. They had scored just 105.5 points per 100 possessions with Westbrook on the floor coming into April 5th. Since then, to about a month, they're scoring 116 points per 100 possessions with him on the floor, and they've seen huge jumps in free throw rate and offensive rebounding percentage. He's doing everything. He's a triple-double machine. It's been huge. Just a couple nights ago, he tied Oscar Robertson for the most triple-doubles in NBA history, and he's probably going to break it here whenever they play next, because that's just what he's been doing lately. But look, they're going to be dangerous in the play-in. They're hot offensively. I'm not really sure about their defense, but look, they have 2 All-Stars. Bradley Beal can go off at any moment. I'm not sure what the update is on his hamstring. I think he hurt it maybe or aggravated it last night or a couple nights ago. I don't know what the update. Hopefully he's healthy, because that's really, they have to have him healthy. But yeah, I mean, look, they're dangerous. They're definitely the most dangerous team currently not in the playoff field. The Pacers aren't really a threat, and the other team that's in there, who is it? It's the Celtics. Right now, it'd be the Celtics and the Hornets and the Wizards and the Pacers. And as of right now, and I'll hand this over to you so you can give your input, but as of right now, the play-in would be the Celtics and the Hornets in the 7-8. The winner of that, of course, the winner of that single game gets the 7 seed. The loser then plays the winner of the 9-10 matchup, the Wizards and the Pacers, and the winner of that game gets the 8 seed. So just looking at the play-in, what do you think about the way the play-in tournament is shaping out?
Well, I'll say this to start out. The West play-in is going to be a lot more interesting. Just straight up. Obviously, the second game could possibly be pretty interesting. You got the loser of Hornets and Celtics playing Hopefully the Wizards. I don't want to see the Pacers in that game. Let's be honest. But I mean, it's not that great on that side of the bracket, but I think it's good that these teams are getting a chance to just fight for the playoffs instead of just tanking the rest of the season. I don't know how I feel about the play-in though. Overall, I'm sort of in the middle on it.
We will probably readdress this next week when we do
right
playoff preview, so we can come back to it. But okay, so if we don't have anything else to mention, the East, we just kind of ran through that. Let's readdress the West real fast, and then we'll wrap this up. Try to keep it to a minimum.
Right, exactly. Okay, so in the West, since we last left off here, the Clippers have solidified themselves in the 3 seed. So for right now, they're a game ahead of the Denver Nuggets. Last time we talked, the Nuggets were ahead of the Clippers, and also last time we talked, the Suns were ahead of the Jazz, and now the Suns are a full 2 games back of the Jazz. So that seems to be a pretty good bet that they're locked in at that first seed. The Jazz are. And then what it gets really interesting when you look at that 5 through 7. Right there you have the Mavericks, the Blazers, and the Lakers. And the Mavericks and the Blazers, they have the tiebreaker on the Lakers. So if the Lakers are going to get out of the play-in tournament, they have to have a better record than either the Blazers or the Mavericks. They can't be tied, or the other team will get the tiebreaker. So those are the most interesting things I see. But let's just go down the list here. The Jazz, I haven't watched them play lately. Obviously, they're still missing Donovan Mitchell, but I feel really good that they're going to get out of the first round. I mean, obviously, it's a little dicey because they possibly could see the Lakers in the first round if if they lose to the Warriors or something. But with how things are now, I think they would beat the Warriors in the playoff series. But then the second round, I'm actually a lot higher on the Nuggets than other people. And I'm also, obviously, I'm higher on my Mavericks. Just, I might be a little biased, but I just think Luka Doncic is at that level to give us a chance in any series. But with the way they defend and the way they play, they're so cohesive offensively. They move the ball around. I think, if anything, the Achilles heel might be Donovan Mitchell taking bad shots. I think at some points Donovan Mitchell gets into his tunnel vision mode, and he gets in this mode to where he thinks he has to take over, but he doesn't have to do that anymore. His team is there, and he just needs to let the game come to him, and he'll affect the game like that. It'll be way better that way. But when I watch the Jazz, a lot of times I feel like Mitchell is just forcing things, especially just in the fourth quarter when he's trying to close games. I think they'd be better off with him just letting everything come to him, because he'll get his shots. He'll get his. That's just, he's that level of player. But I'm going to just pass it off to you. That's really all I have to say about the Jazz.
Well, it's obviously impressive for the Utah Jazz.
Right.
More credit to Quinn Snyder doing another incredible job with this team. They're the first team to hit the 50-win mark, and that's incredibly impressive given it's only a 72-game season. So it's a shortened schedule. They've hit the 50-win mark. They've been sort of, I think, probably the most consistent team, like from start to finish in the West. And that's why they're sitting here controlling their own destiny for the 1 seed. I don't have this specific scenario, but they probably, if they win, let's see this. So they have Golden State on the road, Portland. Portland will be tough. And then OKC and Sacramento, those two will be wins. unless they, rest their stars and have already clinched. But, that's a whole other story for another day. Now, as far as the team goes, as you mentioned, they've been missing Donovan Mitchell. They've been missing Mike Conley. And they've been hot lately. And the reason is because they're getting major contributions from their other players, which is really good to see if you're a Jazz fan. Bojon Bogdanovic, I get confused, Bogdan and Bojan. But Bojan Bogdanovic has been averaging over 30 points per game on 60% shooting with a career high 48 against Denver on Friday night in the last 5 games, which they've won. And they're scoring the offense 120 points per 100 possessions without Donovan Mitchell. So add him back into the fold. They'll probably, I don't know if they can keep that pace up, but it's a really good offensive team given that they're getting good contributions from Bojan, Joe Ingles, Jordan Clarkson off the bench, all those guys. They're still a 3-point shooting powerhouse like they were at the start of the season. And they're the only team to rank in the top 5 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. And if they stay that way, they'd be I'm reading off of NBA.com again. They're just the 3rd team in the last 25 years to finish in the top 3 on both ends of the floor. And the other 2 were the 2014-2015 Warriors and the 2016-2017 Warriors. And those are pretty darn good teams as well.
Right.
We won't make that comparison because obviously the Warriors were probably better. But they had Steph Curry and a bunch of other, the whole story. But yeah, I really like the Jazz. Now, of course, I feel bad for the top teams in the West because they've worked so hard, and now you could potentially see, a healthy LeBron James and Anthony Davis in the first round, which wouldn't be necessarily fair to the top teams, but that's the way it's going to be. So I do like them in a 7-game series against the Warriors. If that were to be the matchup, obviously you have Steph, but what else do you have besides Steph? Unless Steph just goes absolutely ballistic and scores, a bunch of points and is able to pull magic out of his butt. The Utah Jazz should win that series and probably at the most 6 games. I'd be surprised if it was pushed to 7. Steph Curry would be an absolute legend to get that series to 7.
Right.
So, I mean, how they match up with the Lakers and possibly getting to the Western Conference Finals, I don't know. We can have that conversation again next week when we know the actual playoff matchups and how the road actually shapes out. Because right now it's just all speculation. Okay, so the Suns, they've dropped to the 2 seed, but they still hold a solid lead over the Clippers for the 2 seed. They're 3 games ahead of the Clippers in the win column and the loss column. Let's see. They're 48-20. I didn't do much research on the Suns, but they've been really good. And they've been really good against the really good teams in this league. When playing teams above 500, they're 26-10. That's the best mark in the league against teams above 500. So we obviously know the impact Chris Paul has had. My question really for the Suns is, of course, I mentioned this in one of our past episodes, DeAndre Ayton, the consistency with which he plays, and then obviously, do they have enough size in the paint to match up with some of these other teams that they're going to face in the West? We're talking about Denver, the Lakers, the teams, I just watched a game the other night where, maybe it was last night actually, where Anthony Davis scored 42 and had 12 rebounds against the Suns. So that's kind of worrisome. That's worrisome. Do they have enough size to match up with some of these other teams like the Jazz, the Lakers, and the Nuggets, if it were to come to that? So, what do you think about the Suns?
Well, you touched on the exact point that I was trying to hit. I was going to hit. That game last night, it was clear to me that they just don't have any interior presence. And I mean, it's okay to not be able to guard Anthony Davis. A ton of teams can't guard Anthony Davis, but you got to have a guy who can punch back when he punches you, you know? And DeAndre Ayton is supposed to be that guy, but I mean, you saw him in that first half. He only had one shot attempt, and another time where he got the ball on the pick and roll, he just fumbled it and caused a turnover. So if he's not going to have an impact, then this team might be gone in the first round. I'm going to be honest. I mean, they need DeAndre Ayton to play up to his number one pick status if they're going to do anything. I mean, there's going to be nights where their shots don't fall, and obviously that was the case last night. They were getting good looks. They were getting the looks Devin Booker normally likes. They were getting the looks Chris Paul normally likes. But if you're perimeter oriented to a fault, on the nights where you're not shooting well, it's just going to be impossible to win.
Right. There's really nothing else I can add to that.
Right.
So it all depends on DeAndre Ayton and the other players they do have on the interior and who they match up with, which we'll get into a little bit later in a later episode. Okay, so let's talk about the Clippers and then the Nuggets. So I'll let you give your thoughts on the Clippers first.
Well, I think the Clippers are in a really good spot. I watched their game the other night. I think they were playing. Who were they playing? They were playing the Lakers, and they just absolutely blitzed them. And obviously, the Lakers didn't have Schroeder. They didn't have THT. They didn't have LeBron. And obviously, Anthony Davis was still coming back at that time. But it wasn't just that. It was just the way that they looked. Offensively, they feel more cohesive. And Rondo has a lot to do with that. And also just, I give Ty Lue a lot of credit because whatever he's doing offensively to get Paul George moving off ball and Kawhi moving off ball to get them open looks, whatever he's doing is working because the way he has them coming off screens, they can drive, they can shoot their pull-up, and when they drive, they create open looks for their shooters, and they're the best three-point shooting team in the league. And then defensively, I mean, they look as good as any team in the league. They have the personnel, obviously we know that, but the key is just going to be mental lapses. If they can just stay committed defensively, I think the Clippers can win the championship, if I'm being completely honest. I think things are lining up for them really well. They just cannot Clipper this up for themselves, just to put it simply.
Yeah. They definitely have the roster to do so. There's no question about it. Now, I think they got Patrick Beverley back. They're adding some pieces back into the fold. They added Beverley back last week. That's important, especially from, just like a leadership and defensive, like an overall identity standpoint. And I believe Serge Ibaka is nearing a return here pretty soon. And that's going to add more to, I guess, their floor spacing. Again, right now they have a league high 7 guys who are shooting 38% or better on at least 100 3-point attempts. So they have the volume and the efficiency from beyond the arc. They have 2 star players. We know what Kawhi has done, his track record in the postseason, although he did kind of fade in the Game 7 against Denver last year. But that's, he's had many other great moments in the playoffs. We know what he's capable of. We know he's the number one here. And they have Paul George, who his struggles in the postseason are well documented. Hopefully, he finally plays like the way we think he should in the playoffs, and if he does, with this team now finally healthy, getting some of these important pieces back, as you mentioned, they're really good on defense. They shoot the three. They kind of have all the components of a championship team. It's just going to depend on the cohesiveness, the chemistry, and then obviously the road, because the West is, not going to be easy once again. So
Right. And
go ahead.
I just want to say this one before we move on. Over the years, every time the Clippers have been good, going back to even before we did this podcast, the Lob City days, I've repeatedly believed in the Clippers and gotten burned every single time. So, Clippers, please do not make me regret that decision. Please. For flipping sake. Please.
At least get to the conference finals.
Yes, please.
That should be the minimum ask for the way this team is constructed.
Right,
so,
exactly. But with that, we will move on. So, the 4 seed, Denver Nuggets. Whew. For me personally, I think Nikola Jokic is the MVP. I mean, obviously, me and you haven't talked about this that much lately, but that's where I'm at. Jokic, I mean, his impact offensively, I think he's probably, right now, I think he's the most impactful offensive player in the league. Just with the way that he orchestrates that offense without dominating the ball as well. He's always creating looks for his team. And also, just with him being on the team, the bench gets better just from him being on the team. Because if you have a bunch of bench guys around Jokic, he's gonna allow them to give you 10 to 12 points when normally they wouldn't, because he's gonna always find them when they're open. And as a player, that's just so freeing, and just being able to be freed up and just knowing that when you're open, you're going to get the ball. That's huge. So I'm a huge Jokic guy. I love watching him play. He's incredible. But in the playoffs, I mean, it's gonna be tough for this team because they're missing Jamal Murray. So I don't know how I feel about them. Obviously, Michael Porter Jr., he's been playing fantastic recently, but his struggles on defense are underrated, in my opinion. I think he's low-key horrible on defense. He doesn't have awareness. He's always late on his rotations. As a on-ball defender, he's okay at times, but he struggles to move his feet a little bit. But this Nuggets team, they could be a first round out, or they could get to the Western Conference Finals. I think it's just all going to depend on matchups, and also it's all going to depend on how Jokic plays. Because if he plays at a level where he's putting up 50-point triple-doubles, I mean, there's not really there's no way to defend what he does, you know?
Right. I agree. Jokic, whether people like it or not, should win the MVP, and I think he will win the MVP. The Nuggets, where they stand right now, they need one more win in their last 4 games to secure home court advantage for at least the first round of the playoffs. So that'd be the 4 seed. If they get one more win and they don't have a necessarily tough schedule, although all their remaining games are on the road, they play Charlotte, Minnesota, Detroit, and Portland. They can get one win for sure out of that. So they're going to have home court advantage in the first round. That's huge, especially with the elevation. In Denver, we've seen how it affects teams in years past. For me, it's really, I know what Jokic is going to be. It's really about Michael Porter Jr. and what they do when Jokic is off the floor. Because when he's off the floor, they haven't looked good. So I'll talk about Michael Porter Jr. first. He's been really good. It seems that ever since Jamal Murray went down with the ACL injury, his numbers have skyrocketed. Over the last 10 games, he's averaging 26.7 points per game, 6 rebounds, shooting 56% from the field and 49% from three. Those are some disgusting numbers. So it's been really good to see that. Obviously, he has to be the second star next to Nikola Jokic now that Jamal Murray's down. And, he's going to have to create more on his own, especially when Jokic is off the floor, because right now, although he's putting up great numbers, approximately 22%, only 22% of his made buckets are going unassisted. So he's getting a lot of help, creating his own shots. I think he needs to create more of his own. I can't speak to – I have watched a couple of Nuggets games. I did watch the game against Brooklyn a couple nights ago, and I've watched a couple other games in the past couple of weeks. But just based off that alone, I do think he's going to have to create more, especially when Jokic is off the floor, because that's been a problem lately. I believe in that game, let's see, the game against the Nets, I believe, when Jokic was off the floor, they were outscored by 16 points. So not good. Actually, no. In the past 4 games, they're getting outscored 16.5 points per 100 possessions when Jokic is off the floor. So that can't be that way if they're going to hope to advance far in the playoffs. But in terms of a first-round series, let's see, who do they play now? Ooh, the Mavericks. That'd be a really good series.
Yep.
So I guess that just segues into the Mavericks. And for that, I'll just hand the floor over to you.
Right.
You're the Mavericks.
Well, my Mavericks have been quietly on the prowl recently. We have won 10 of our last 12 games. I really like how we've been playing. And also, I think it's pretty notable the fact that those 2 losses are against the Kings, and we got swept by the Kings this year. So we just don't play well against the Kings, whatever it is. I don't know. So if you take out those Kings games, then we've been playing amazing. So all jokes aside, I just think that our team, where we're at right now, it's all coming together with Tim Hardaway Jr. being our third guy. He's been incredible recently. He had a game where he had 10 threes about a week ago. It was against who was it against? I can't think of it. But he's been great recently is the point. Obviously we're going to get Porzingis back. I think we're just holding him out just to be safe. His ankle is fine. I think it's going to be okay. But it's all just going to depend on what we can get from Porzingis. We've been playing really well without him, but the fact is, for this team to go anywhere, we need him. I mean, his spacing that he adds, and also just him being on the floor, just being a threat, it adds an extra element to this team. So him just giving us his 22, 24 points, that's going to be big for us. So hopefully we get him back, and I think that series against the Nuggets, I think we have a good shot. I think it's going to be 7 games. I think it's going to go all the way. I think it's a toss-up.
I could see that for sure. The reason I was smiling, sort of laughing, during your Mavericks talk is just because I was thinking of, I can't get the image out of my head of Luka Doncic's face when he was ejected for the low blow to, I don't know who it was.
Colin Sexton.
Yeah. That was interesting call. I didn't necessarily, I mean, there was something there, but I don't know. But yeah, in terms of the Mavs, it's weird. I mean, They've won 10 of their last 12. Both losses were to the Kings.
Right, exactly.
It's just one of those things where you see a team and I don't know how, it's something.
Right.
My Spurs don't play well against the Grizzlies. It sort of works out that way. But yeah, they've taken control of the 5 seed in the West. Doncic has been amazing lately, regardless of whatever other antics he has. You mentioned Hardaway Jr. That's been huge, especially with Porzingis out. He starts 7 of the last 9 games, and he's averaged 27 points, and he shot just over 50% from 3 over his last 6 games. So he's been really good, much needed. Now we well documented the Mavs struggles to close out games in the clutch time or the crunch time. Last year, they were outscored by 4.8 points per 100 possessions. Wait a minute.
And that's actually a lot for like in the clutch. That's actually a lot more than it seems.
4.8 points per 100 possessions. They went 17 and 24 in games that were within 5 points within the last 5 minutes. Now, this season, they've been better. They're not necessarily elite in the clutch right now.
Mm-hmm.
Their clutch defense isn't actually that great if you look at the stats, but they have been a lot better, and they've been finding ways to win those games. They do have a winning record, 17 and 15 in games that are within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. So that's a good sign. If games come down, to the wire, we know Luka Doncic has a history of hitting clutch threes.
Right.
So yeah, I like their chances against the Nuggets as well. I think it just comes down to I don't know actually. Obviously Jokic is going to be tough, but as I mentioned, I think Porter Jr. and as I mentioned last podcast, Porzingis, because the supporting cast has been playing well lately. I mentioned Hardaway Jr., Jalen Brunson, all those guys. So I think it's really just Porzingis and Michael Porter Jr. Those are like the 2 X factors for each team, in my opinion. But
right, and for the Mavericks to win that series, in those whatever amount of minutes where Jokic is off the floor, the Mavericks have to take advantage. So
yeah,
I don't know how many minutes Jokic is going to play, probably somewhere in the 40s, but you got to take advantage of that time. But anyway, I think that'll do it for the Mavericks there. I think we covered everything we needed to say there. Now to the Portland Trailblazers, who early in the season, Damian Lillard was carrying the crap out of this team. He just basically had this superhuman level of closing games, and that's what was keeping them afloat and keeping them in the top few seeds in the West. But then once that started to fade, Damian Lillard got injured a little bit. He got banged up, and then they got healthy, actually. But that's right when he got banged up, and they still they haven't looked great. They had that long stretch where they went, I think they went like 2-12 in a 14-game stretch, and that really hurt them. So now they're sitting in the 6th seed. Damian Lillard has looked better of late. CJ McCollum, he's going to give you his buckets as well. But it's hard for me to take the Blazers serious. I'm going to be honest. They just don't defend well enough. They have defenders, but they don't defend collectively, if that makes sense. Like Covington is a good individual defender. Lillard is decent as an individual defender. Then obviously they have Derrick Jones Jr., who's been hurt recently. And then Norman Powell's a good defender as well. It's just some reason they're just not cohesive. They're not communicating defensively or whatever the case may be. It's not working. So,
They have the Blazers. They've been playing much better as of late. They did go through like a span of 8 games where they went 1-7, and now in the past 8 games they've gone 7-1. So much better. You know what you're going to get from Dame most nights, and we've seen what CJ McCollum is obviously capable of. He's going to give you his traditional, 22 a night, whatever he's averaging right now, as long as he's healthy. And I can't talk. As he mentioned, the Blazers, they can score, but they don't defend at all. And the concerning thing for me is they are 0-9. They have an 0-9 record against the Jazz, the Suns, and the Nuggets this season. So they haven't won a game against those teams. Now they do hold the tiebreaker over the Lakers. That game was crazy the other night. But obviously they won those games without, AD and LeBron and AD, whatever it was. So it wasn't a fully healthy Lakers squad. So we've yet to see how they match up with the Lakers, but they probably won't have to play the Lakers until later in the playoffs, so it really doesn't matter anyways. But yeah, their defense is really bad. In those 9 losses to the Jazz, the Suns, and the Nuggets, NBA.com is just loaded. They come out with the power rankings, and I don't really pay attention to the rankings because it really doesn't matter. We're getting close to the playoffs, and the playoffs are all dependent on matchups, so rankings don't really matter whether you're better than this team and that team. But in those 9 losses to the Jazz, Suns, and Nuggets, they have allowed more than 125 points per 100 possessions against the top 4 teams in the West.
Oof.
Disgusting numbers.
Yeah.
It can't be that way if they have any shot of advancing. But right now, who would they play? I believe they would play the Clippers in the first round. Yes.
Right, the Clippers.
So they do hold the tiebreaker over the Lakers, but they still have work to do to secure that non-play-in tournament spot in the playoffs. And they do have a sort of tough schedule coming down the stretch. They should beat Houston, but they play at Utah, at Phoenix, and then Denver at home. So I think they can go 2-2 in those 4 games. I think they'll win probably 2 of them. I think that's a fair expectation. I don't know what that gets them, but
yeah, that would be 41-31.
Okay, so I don't know if that's enough to clinch the 6th seed or whatever, but I think it possibly could be, because if you look at the Lakers' schedule coming down the stretch, who do they got? Okay, the Knicks, the Rockets. LeBron's coming back. Houston, Indy, New Orleans without Zion, and New York. So New York's their toughest remaining game. They have LeBron coming back. They could win 3 of those 4. And if Portland loses 2 of these games, maybe the Lakers, I don't know the scenario, but it's interesting.
Right.
So just
the Lakers, I think they would have to win out to give Portland trouble, is the thing, because they don't have the tiebreaker. Yeah. So if the Lakers win all 4 games, they would be 42-30, and then if Portland goes 2-2, like you said, they would be 41-31, and in that case, they would drop down to the 7th seed. So that's probably best case scenario for the Lakers.
So for the Trailblazers, you just hope that you can win at least 2 of these remaining 4 games. The Lakers don't win out. But either way, I mean, it is what it is with the Trailblazers. They just, I don't think they have enough defense to win a playoff series, but it's Damian Lillard, so you never know I think they could take a team maybe 6 games, 6 or 7 possibly, depending on who it is. Maybe the Nuggets somehow sneak up on the Clippers. I don't know. I'll stop rambling. Let's talk about the Lakers. Let's talk about the play-in in general, because right now it's the Lakers against the Warriors and the Grizzlies against the Spurs, but the Pelicans are on the Spurs' tail for the 10 seed. they're without Zion, but they're only a game and a half back with however many games there are remaining. I think there's 4 or 5 for the Spurs and probably 4 for the Pelicans. The Spurs do hold the tiebreaker over the Pelicans, so Pelicans would have to, I believe, either win out or maybe win, most of their games coming down the stretch to overtake San Antonio. But let's just get your thoughts to close this out on the play-in tournament as it currently stands. Mainly the Lakers.
Right. Well, the Lakers, I think they have to play Davis at center. I think that's been made clear with their experiment with Andre Drummond in the starting lineup. That hasn't worked. It's not going to work. They have to play Davis at center. I know he doesn't like to play center for some reason, but he has to do it. Second of all, LeBron has to be healthy. They don't have Rondo anymore. They don't have that secondary playmaker really. So LeBron has to be the guy to come back, be healthy, and just facilitate. Even in those first few games back, if he doesn't score a ton, it'll be fine. But he just has to orchestrate the offense. That's been the biggest thing without him in the lineup these last few games. But then their defense is fine. Their defense is there. They're championship ready on defense. It's all about whether they're going to get enough on offense. And their shooting from 3 has been good this year. It's just all about how consistently they're able to find those easy buckets. They want to get out in transition, obviously. With LeBron, when LeBron and Anthony Davis are out there, they get out in transition a lot. But lately, they haven't been able to, and that's hurt them a lot. So they just got to get healthy, and I think they can still be anybody. It's just going to be a lot harder now. They're a 7 seed. It's just they're not going to have home court, and they're also going to be playing top teams right off the bat. So LeBron's going to be thrown right into the fire.
As we know, there's really nothing that LeBron James can't do. So obviously, I'm not ever going to doubt him. He's never lost the first round series in his career, so I don't worry too much. But as I mentioned, they just have to be healthy, and they can beat anyone. With Schroeder coming back and James coming back, Davis has looked more like himself after struggling, sort of coming off that injury. He's looked more of himself the past couple games, the last 2 games. 78 points, 24 rebounds, 10 assists, 3 steals, and 4 blocks. That's Anthony Davis right there. So he's back. They just need to get James back in the fold. Schroeder is obviously an important part of this too, what he provides offensively. But I think it was a good sign that this past week, they went 2-2 against Denver, Clippers, Portland, and Phoenix. 3 of those teams, or a couple of those teams, they could actually see in the first round. Phoenix is the one I'm really looking at. And we saw what they did to Phoenix last night, and it was pretty impressive without James. So it's a matter of getting healthy for the Lakers. I think they would beat the Grizzlies pretty handedly if they were given that matchup in a play-in. They would get the 7th seed. Probably have to play the Suns. So it could end up, working out pretty favorably for the Lakers, as favorably as it can, I guess. So we'll see how they play. They have a pretty easy schedule. They're coming down the stretch. I think LeBron is coming back for their Tuesday matchup against the Knicks. So that will be an interesting watch. The Knicks are playing well. And obviously LeBron's coming back. Schroeder's coming back. So we'll see. But I'll save my predictions for next week. But I think they play the Warriors. Okay, that changes a lot because Steph Curry, 1 game, you never know. But I still think they would win. And then the Grizzlies Spurs, that's a flip of the coin. It all depends on I don't know.
Yeah.
Now it's Jaren Jackson Jr. back. I kind of worry about that, but I didn't really have high expectations for the Spurs the way they've been playing lately, anyways. And they could totally fall out of this equation, given their remaining schedule. The schedule makers did not do them any favors coming down the stretch. They have Milwaukee tonight, Brooklyn on Wednesday, the Knicks on Friday or Thursday. So they have Brooklyn, New York back-to-back, and then Phoenix to close it out. They could lose all 5 of those games.
Yeah, that's tough. That's really tough.
I wouldn't be surprised, even though they're without Zion, if the Pelicans jumped up to the 10 seed. I don't know. Probably wouldn't change a lot because they're without Zion, but
right.
I don't know. It'll be much more interesting than the Eastern Conference play, and either way it shapes out.
Right. So. A lot more star power on that side. And I think to close this out, I'm just going to say, I think the Lakers will beat the Suns in a 7-game series, if that were to be. Like I said, it's just the matchup. I'm not saying the Suns are bad or anything. It's just the matchup on the interior. They just don't have enough inside to match up against the Lakers. But we'll see what happens. With that, that's going to do it, guys. That was 68. So thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button, like the video, share it with your friends. And until next time, guys, peace out.